Bet you thought this channel was abandoned. Yeah, I feel like shit for leaving you guys waiting for so long, but I'm gonna spare you the excuses, and instead we're just gonna jump right back in, and I am going to buy some coins here. I'm only gonna buy a couple because I've had bad experiences with buying too many coins in the past. I've had a playthrough of Crystal a while back where I didn't feel like gambling at all, so I just bought all the coins that I needed for what I wanted, but then I ran into money problems later on in the game, so that kind of put me off on that approach, so I'm gonna be actually earning most of the coins that I need by actually gambling. It's also pretty tedious buying coins in the first generation because you just have to stand there, start the dialogue, buy 10 coins, then start the dialogue again, buy another 10, and then another 10, and then another 10, and you can't just buy more than 10 at a time. So yeah, I'll earn my coins the legitimate way by actually gambling, but I'm not gonna make you sit through all of it. The only thing I'll say is that the sprites on the slot machine themselves are actually completely different between red, green, blue, and yellow. I have a few more things to say about the gambling minigame, but I'll leave that for later in the video when you have some more interesting gameplay to watch. And I'm gonna cut away now until I have the coins that I need.
One eternity later.
Alright, now that's gonna be enough to get us the Destruction Beam TM, also known as Hyper Beam, 150 power, 90% accuracy, but it has to recharge after you use it, so you basically give your opponent a free turn. But, in Generation 1, would you believe it, this move is completely broken. So in this generation, there are a bunch of conditions under which Destruction Beam does not need to recharge. Most of them are a bit specific, but the one that really breaks this move is Destruction Beam doesn't need to recharge if you get out of my way. I want to get thank you. So as I was saying, Destruction Beam doesn't need to recharge if it KOs the opponent's Pokemon. And I actually have I have just enough left to buy 2 more Casey. Not that I have any use for them, but I'm not gonna use those coins either, so hey, why not? So yeah, Destruction Beam in this generation lets you completely bypass its drawback just by getting a kill, and with 150 power, it's the second strongest attack in the game after only Explosion, so chances are you are gonna get that kill. Now I'm gonna give it to my Nidoking and replace Horn Thrust. And then we're gonna see it in action against this really not suspicious Rocket Grunt just standing with his back against the poster in a game corner for no reason whatsoever. So yeah, big surprise. The game corner is actually owned by the Rocket Gang. Not surprising considering gambling is often associated with, you know, organized crime, especially in Japan. And that's another thing. The fact that the prize corner is a separate building from the actual game corner itself is another one of those cultural things where, like, a lot of Western players probably think, like, why did they do it that way? But this is actually how pachinko parlors in Japan operate, because gambling is illegal in Japan, or gambling for money directly, at least. So, the loophole they use to get around this is that you don't win money directly, you win tokens. So basically the coins in this game. And then these tokens can be exchanged at a legally distinct, separate venue for money, or in the case of this game, for, you know, prizes. Anyway, gambling itself, completely and totally rigged in this game. Some of the NPCs imply that there are certain slot machines that work better than others, and that's somewhat true. Everyone always assumed that that meant that there are specific machines that always give better results than others, and kids would, like, share their experiences and tell each other on the schoolyards which are the good ones, but actually none of that really matters. The way it actually works is that there is a random slot machine that is determined as the lucky one every time you enter the building. So earlier you saw me using the machine on the bottom right. that's the one with the highest odds of being the lucky machine. But actually, it doesn't make that much of a difference whether or not you're playing on the lucky machine. What's a lot more important is that the machines have, like, phases or modes. As in, while you're playing, even on the same slot machine, it switches between, like, unlucky mode, super lucky mode, and so on. I'm not gonna explain the whole mechanics in detail. If I can remember, I'm gonna put a link in the description to a video that explains it all in detail. But as someone commented on that video, it's really impressive how much thought the programmers put into rigging the game corner, and also how it's like one of the least bugged features in the game. It makes sense, of course, for the slots to be rigged because, you know, Rocket Gang and such, but I'm pretty sure that's not actually what they were going for, and it was just easier to program. But it's interesting how it ended up kind of strangely making sense in a weird kind of way. Right, so I've pretty much talked about everything I wanted to say regarding gambling and the game corner in general. I want to go back to what I was saying in the previous episode about the possibility of a sub-release of the Journeys anime. Yeah, if you would please consult the graph. Why do I keep getting my hopes up for TPCI to join the rest of us in the 21st century, which I'm sure is not gonna happen until the 22nd? Even when the show started airing in Japan, and there was no sign of a simulcast, I was still huffing so much copium that I was like, okay, maybe they're not doing a simulcast, but maybe they'll release a sub version alongside with the dub. Of course it didn't happen! But the fact that they got our hopes up with that sub trailer, and then didn't do a sub release of the show, could mean one of two things. Either they are so fucking out of touch that they don't even realize that a subtitled release of the show might be something that someone somewhere might possibly be interested in, or they're doing this on purpose. And I'm really starting to believe that they're just fucking with us at this point, because they keep fucking doing this. Like, for a while they kept tweeting out spoilers from the show months before the dub was out. And there's no way that you could legally watch it. They did the same thing when Satoshi became champion. They tweet immediately, make it big news, tweet it out everywhere. And they tweeted that out on fucking TPCI's Twitter before fansubs were even out. Then they did it again with a plot point in Horizons. Just, like, in record time, TPCI went from refusing to acknowledge the Japanese version exists at all to spoiling it left and right, while still not giving people a way to watch it. It reminds me of a statement I remember from, I think it was Serena's English voice actress back in the XY days, who was like, well, if you don't like the replaced music in the dub, just watch the Japanese version. Well, then fucking let me! Like, I'm not anti-piracy or anything, but if you have one of your own voice actors going out there and essentially telling people to commit a crime, maybe it's time for you as a company to rethink your approach. Anyway, moving on from TPCI insanity for now. Something else that I mentioned in the last video. That guy who stalked my old YouTube account over a 4Kids comment. I didn't realize how infamous this kid was, because one of you guys knew... My bag is full. Okay. Now let's see, what do we got? I'm just gonna use the escape rope to get out of here and deposit some stuff into the PC. Yeah, so anyway, the crazy 4Kids stalker. One of you guys knew exactly who I was talking about. Like, do you mean Tammy Newborn? I'm like, I don't know, do I? Because I didn't remember any of his usernames. So I looked him up and immediately recognized that writing style. 4Kids is the greatest thing in the world. Everything they do is the best and better than the original. And you're a nerd if you don't like them. And you should die and I'm gonna go and kill you. And you're a nerd and 4Kids is the best thing ever. Flash to the past seeing those ramblings again. Also, apparently people found out his real name and that he's been to jail, but I don't know if that's legit, so I'm not gonna keep talking about that and instead move on to the last topic from the last episode that I still wanna come back to. the absolute mess that is the German fan subbing scene. I said I was gonna talk about it at some point. Fuck it, might as well do it now. So basically what it all comes down to is what's called the fansubber codex. If that sounds like the most German thing you've ever heard, that's because it is. So at the heart of that is basically a gentleman's agreement between fansubbers and licensing companies that says, okay, we're cool with fansubs existing for shows that aren't licensed, but as soon as they get licensed, you have to take them down. Now that sounds nice. And I've seen this brought up as a positive example from English-speaking fans about what licensing companies should be doing instead of bitching about piracy all the time. But here's a little insider secret. In practice, it doesn't fucking work. You would think that with a system like this, there would not be as much of a, oppressive copyright regime, but what actually happens is that the fansub scene itself becomes part of the oppressive copyright regime. The website that's at the center of all of this links to something called the Anime Copyright Alliance. Unironic, you wouldn't download a car shit spewed by people who are still by law pirates. So basically the gist of it is fansub groups aren't allowed to associate in any way with piracy sites. In fact, they're supposed to explicitly distance themselves from any kind of wares sites. Most of these groups don't even list their stuff on AniDB because I guess that place is also evil because they also list piracy groups. And if you break any of these rules, you're like thrown out of the scene, thrown into exile. The websites that are at the center of all of this, because again, nobody lists their stuff on the established international places, so there's like these German-specific fansub hub sites that throw you out when you break any of these stupid rules. If you've been in the English anime piracy scene, you may have heard the term fansub cartel, but like the groups that are called that, like try to deny that it exists, it's like a conspiracy theory. Nobody in the German scene is denying anything. In fact, they're proud of it. Oh, and creditless openings, by the way, are banned too, because that's disrespectful to the creators, as if anyone who needs fansubs could even read them in the first place. And there's something I found when researching this. Apparently back in 2011 there was some kind of leaked document, again from some higher-ups from that fucking website that's at the center of all of this. Apparently they wanted to make the codex even stricter and basically force groups to moralize to their leechers, like, if you don't delete this file, so seconds that this show gets licensed, then you might as well be committing grand larceny. And you know how even in the English scene back in the 2000s, there used to be some groups that would kind of do this like ethical fansubbing, delete your stuff when it gets licensed sort of thing, and they would always have these disclaimers like, this is a free fansub, not for sale or rent. Those are required by the codex, but apparently that wasn't enough. Because, according to that leak, which, to be fair, might be a hoax, I'm not sure, it's kind of hard to tell 15 years later, but supposedly they wanted to require the full codex being hard-coded into the video. Take a look at this masterpiece. Now, this is all pretty retarded, but the biggest problem that I have with this whole system is that it makes zero exceptions for shows, well, specifically shows like Pokémon that are licensed, but not with a sub version, only an edited dub. And it's just more common in Germany than in the Anglosphere, so it's not even just the expected shows like, you know, Pokémon or Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Bakugan or whatever. But even stuff like Dragon Ball Z and early One Piece have been stuck on single audio DVDs until recently. And the only reason they're being freed from that now is because last year we enacted the Barrierefreiheitsstärkungsgesetz, which mandates original audio with subtitles for accessibility. But even there, that doesn't help us for cases like Pokémon, where the original audio is being blocked from the rest of the world by the American licensor. So the most Germany can do is to treat the English dub as the original audio and make subtitles for that close enough. So if you want a sub version, you're shit out of luck, because rights holders won't do it because they're incompetent morons, And fansubbers won't do it because these shows are technically licensed, so subbing them would be breaking the codex. Your only hope is for some obscure underground pirate subber to take on the project, but then tough luck finding those. Like, there used to be this one subber who had all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Zeal and parts of Arc 5 subbed. But the only way to access these subs was to specifically ask her for an invitation to a private blog that she had set up to hide from copyright police. And even if you still have your login link to that blog, you can go there, but then all the links are dead. So those subs, I can't find them anymore. I used to have a bunch of them on my drive and I was stupid enough to delete them. So now we're back to the only way of watching Zeal in German being consume for kids, slop, and love it. Same for Pokemon. One of the only parts of the Pokemon anime that was ever subbed in German was early Best Wishes, before the German dub got confirmed. And then when it did, they immediately nuked everything because, codex. But, yeah, another thing that pisses me off about this whole codex situation is that the people who decide this stuff act like this is common sense and that this is how fansubs work everywhere. Except they're obviously bullshitting because you can't honestly tell me that they don't know what's going on in the English scene, because that's who they rely on for their own translations, because most of these clowns don't even understand Japanese, so they just take existing English subs, translate them to German, and it's really obvious because most of the time they can't even do that right. And their big justification, their killer argument for why this system is so brilliant is that it opens up the opportunities for fansubbers to work together with official distributors. And they act like this can only ever happen in a country that has a system like this in place, and ignore the fact that this has happened over and over again in the American industry that doesn't have this system. Like, how many of the people translating for Crunchyroll or whatever these days are former fansubbers? A lot of them. Oh, hold that thought. I'm gonna get the elevator key from this guy. If you talk to him from the left, he actually drops it below your feet. Look, I'm standing on top of it. So yeah, it's called the elevator key in the Japanese version, as in literally the English word elevator is used. But in English, despite the game being localized in America, it's called the lift key because, character limitations for item names are kind of a bitch. Just ask Generation 2's Pruskerberry. So I just found this max up. I'm giving it to Houdin, and why did I never use all these other max ups? I just noticed that I have a bunch of them just laying around. I'm just gonna give them all to Houdin. So yeah, there's one more thing that I wanted to say about this whole German fansub thing, and then I'm gonna shut up about it, promise. Namely, the example that pro-codex people keep giving. They always go to this one example to prove how absolutely brilliant the system is. They always point to the anime Bakuman, where the publisher basically distributed a fansub as the official version. That's their killer argument. That's what makes this all worthwhile. Yeah, you still can't watch Dragon Ball GT uncut, but one time there were colorful karaoke letters in an official release, so we're basically even. Beyond parody. Anyway, next topic. It's everyone's favorite segment of this LP. Let's talk about names again. Yes, I always think, man, I've talked about everything, right? We've had English names change to different English names. We've had Japanese names change to different Japanese names. We've had the same name referring to different characters in different languages. And at some point, I always think like, man, how much dumber can this get? And you know what? They found a way. They actually managed to make this whole mess even more absurd for absolutely no reason whatsoever. Again. So as of Legends ZA, there are now separate names for European Spanish and Latin American Spanish. Why? Because fuck you, that's why. And from what I understand, from what I've been told, those guys had a hard enough time communicating with each other already. Now, when this was announced, I was on Twitter joking around about how my uncle works at Nintendo and he leaked to me that in Generation 10 there will be different names for British English and American English, because I figured that would be the best way to articulate how absolutely ridiculous this is. But again, I keep fucking underestimating how stupid Pokemon fans are, because there was actually a guy who said that would be a great idea. Because they also did it in Mario Kart once. There were like different track names between American and the British version. And for some reason, this guy thought that was such a brilliant concept that it's worth having to learn hundreds of names twice just to be able to communicate in your own language. Or like, you know who else found out the hard way about how stupid this is? Quebec. Because those guys, they used to only get the games in English, and the anime even got a separate dub that was in French with the English names, because that's what they were used to. But then one day, they started releasing the games in French over there. And overnight, they were just expected to know the French names. People hated it. But somehow Anglos act like I'm the crazy one for saying this is getting ridiculous. Like, explain all of this to someone who has never heard of Pokemon, they'll tell you that's obviously crazy, right? But this idea of name localizations is so ingrained into Western Pokemon fandom that people just see it as so self-evident. Of course, if you learn a different language, you have to learn new words. Like, yeah, because languages evolve naturally over thousands of years, not because somebody woke up one day and decided to rename all the animals. Like, what kind of attitude is this towards changes that half the time don't even serve their stated purpose of localizing for a different language? I don't get it. Like, you remember when the Chinese went and had actual IRL protests with, like, picket signs and shit? Because they changed the spelling of Pikachu's name? Like, can we have just a fraction of that attitude in the West instead of whatever it is we have? And you know what the worst part is? It was never supposed to be this bad. Because apparently the original plan was that English was supposed to be the only language that would get its own set of names, and everyone else would just get the Japanese names. The only reason the rest of Europe got dragged into this mess is because the French translator, Julian Bardakov, convinced Nintendo of Japan that they wouldn't fly over here. So yeah, of course it would be the French who would refuse to take loanwords. But it drives me up the wall that we have this one guy to thank for this whole entire fucking mess. And guys like Dr. Lava will genuinely frame this as this hero who saved us all from this boring alternate reality where we all call Pokemon by the same names. Oh. And he's also the reason why Satoshi is called Sasha in the French version, because apparently this guy always wanted a son named Sasha. But I don't know, I guess he couldn't get laid, so the closest he got was to rename a video game character. So yeah, Satoshi aka Red aka Ash is called Sasha in French. And while we're on the topic of mind-bogglingly stupid things that Anglophones say about Pokemon name localizations, there are genuinely people who single out this specific name change and act like it's the dumbest thing ever, while the thousands of others are treated, like I said, as totally natural. I don't understand. Why would the French call Ash Sasha? I don't know, why do you call Satoshi Ash? And these two rockets that I just fought, in yellow, those were replaced by the second battle against Musashi and Kojiro. I'm sorry, Jesse and James, and now I'm about to fight the leader of the Rocket Gang, Sakaki, for the first time, aka Giovanni. A name change that pretty much single-handedly changed the perception of this whole organization for the Western fanbase. Instead of the Yakuza that the Rocket Gang are obviously based on, you'll see Westerners refer to them as the Pokemon Mafia, just because they decided to give the leader an Italian name. Apparently there was even some rumor in the Italian fandom about him being based on Berlusconi or something. But I'm surprised they didn't change his name to something else in Italian, because isn't media portrayal of the Mafia seen as kind of controversial over there? But I suppose it's just because Italian is one of the few European languages that actually kept the English names. And would you believe they actually complain about that? You guys don't know how good you have it! Oh, and even Japan is getting affected by this now. As in, they have changed the official romanization of Umbreon's Japanese name from Blackie to Bracky, because apparently Blackie is a slur now. Yeah, when I was a kid, I had a dog named Blackie, and I have never fucking heard of this before. So, congratulations, I guess. Your attempts at being politically correct are teaching people new slurs. Okay, so with Sakaki defeated, he was about to give me the Sylph Scope, which I need to unveil the specters in the Pokemon Tower. As a reminder, the word I'm translating as specter is translated as ghost in the English version, and the Pokemon known as ghost in the Japanese version is called Haunter in the English version. Isn't localization just wonderful? Oh, and eventually they even canonized different Pokemon names between languages as an in-universe thing, as in the separate regions in the Pokemon world speak different languages and call Pokemon by different names, except it doesn't make any sense because A, you see characters traveling across regions all the time and they never have any communication problems, and B, human characters also have different names. I'm sorry, but when I go to Japan, I don't start calling myself by a Japanese name, and even less so to a different German name from my actual German name. I'm sorry, it doesn't make any sense no matter which way you slice it. Alright, so before I go back to Xion Town for the Pokemon Tower, I'm gonna go into the department store here and buy some balls, because I'm about to catch my next team member in there. Now, which one is it that sells balls? No, that's TM's. I think it should be on this floor, yeah, but oh god, they only sell Super Balls here. I thought this was supposed to be the store that has everything. I would prefer to buy regular Monster Balls because they're a lot more price efficient. So I guess I'll just go to Xion Town and then check if they sell Monster Balls there. So the second stage balls are called Super Balls in Japanese. Supposedly there was some trademark issue with a toy called Super Ball, and that's why they called them Great Balls in English, but then they also changed Hyper Balls into Ultra Balls. And then in Generation 8 they introduced the Ultra Beasts and had a specific ball for those, and they called that Ultra Ball in Japanese. Oops, we already used that name in English. Gotta call them Beast Balls instead. Almost like you should have had the foresight not to change names willy-nilly. You've had 9 generations to learn this lesson and it keeps happening. And if you're familiar with the Pokemon Pure RGB ROM hack, they introduced a new type of ball and in their infinite wisdom decided to call it a Hyper Ball. So now if anyone wants to translate that hack into any language that already uses the Hyper Ball name, now they're in the position where they have no choice but to rename it into something like Mega Ball, which is what they should have called it in the first place, and we would have avoided this whole fiasco. Alright, so I'm gonna put one of my Pokemon into the PC, because I'm about to catch my next team member, and I want some space in my party. Right, Masaki's PC... yeah, I don't need Eevee, I'm just gonna deposit that. Right, so I'm about to catch either a Ghost or a Gosu. Either one is fine, I'm just gonna evolve it into a Gengar anyway. So, let's go into the shop, see if they sell Monster Balls. Nope, still only Supers. Oh well, I guess I'm going with Supers then. I'm just gonna buy 10 because it's kind of a force of habit from the newer games where you get a Premier Ball if you buy 10. Right, so the Gengar line is the only line of Ghost types in Generation 1. A type that's supposed to be super effective against the almighty Psychic type. But in this generation, once again, the programmer's fucked up. So in this game, Psychic types are immune to Ghost attacks. So Gengar's whole selling point is kind of a complete lie, and still, despite that, it manages to be a really good Pokemon because of its stats and its immunity to normal types. And it's also great for catching Pokemon because of Hypnosis, which it learns a lot earlier than Fushigibana does Sleep Powder. Okay, here we go. Let's try to catch this thing. Of course, I changed my lead to Houdin for this place, but I'm not gonna try it to attack because a Psybeam is gonna kill it. So I'm just gonna paralyze and then immediately start throwing balls. Here we go. Ball number 1. Once, twice, 3 times. I got it in 1 ball. That's great, but now I bought all those Super Balls for nothing, and here I was going on about price effectiveness, and then I buy way more than I actually need. In fact, I wouldn't have even have needed any because I still had to. Anyway, I'm gonna put it in the lead and train it up a little, and hopefully by the time this episode is over, I'll have an evolved Ghost. And then what I'll do is I'll do a trade evolution off screen, and then in the next episode I'll have a fully evolved Gengar. Right, so the Pokemon Tower. Last time I was here, I talked about this thing that happens when you get a random encounter on the same tile where an enemy trainer sees you. And how it seems to happen a lot more often in this place than anywhere else, and I wondered why. Someone left a comment on that video with an explanation that makes a lot of sense. It's just that this place is very dense with all the gravestones and such. So there's relatively many trainers compared to the amount of walkable tiles. So it's only natural that random encounter and trainer encounter on the same tile are more likely to happen than in other places. Alright, Gosu is about to die. I don't want that to happen, so I'm gonna heal. And there's one more thing that came out while I was gone. A bunch of you have probably already supplanted the memory, so I'm sorry for bringing this up again, but I really want to talk about it. Pokemon Path to the Peak. More like Path to the Bleak, am I right? You know, 4Kids was a lot worse than TPCI when it came to dubbing the anime, but at least they stuck to dubbing the anime and didn't try making their own spin-off shows. They did for Yu-Gi-Oh!, but even Capsule Monsters at least tried to match, like, the style that the anime had. But now we've got a Pokemon Beanmouth cartoon. You know those people who deny that Pokemon is a JRPG or that Pokemon is an anime because of some criteria that they made up in their heads? When I see stuff like Path to the Peak, I can't help but think, you know what, at this point, those people are right. Not for the reasons they think, but the localizers won. Pokemon is not a Japanese franchise anymore. It's over. But then I see that there's actually still really cool stuff coming out from Japan, like Project Voltage, that Ghost Dive song, Poketsume, all those things came out around the same time as Path to the Peak. And not a peep from TPCI about any of these. Not even a tweet acknowledging their existence. Nothing. Oh yeah, Poketsume has an English dub. Yeah, in the Middle East. But any part of this franchise that has any plans of being released in the West at this point, you know it's gonna be globalized garbage that's ashamed to be Japanese. But Japan is getting 4Kids nostalgia slop that they have no context for even being nostalgic about. Because there was that one scene from Path to the Peak that went around of a dad in the car with his kids forcing them to listen to classic Pokemon music, and out of all songs they picked fucking Pokemon World. I can't listen to that song on its own without cringing my face off. It gives off this rapping cartoon animal with a backwards hat energy. Like what executives in the 90s thought kids thought was cool. And now, thanks to Path to the Peak being released in Japanese, there is now an official Japanese dub of the worst 4Kids opening, but God forbid we get any of the Japanese ones. Same with, like, in the Detective Pikachu movie, there's the fucking, that part where he sings the American theme song. And in the Japanese dub, they translated that literally, and someone was like, well, see, this is why localization is important. They should have changed it to the Japanese theme song instead. Except we wouldn't have had this mismatch in the first place if the anime was dubbed faithfully from Japanese to begin with. In general, I don't like the resurgence of Western adaptations of Japanese properties. Like, but way back in the 90s, there used to be all these cartoons, these Western cartoons about, like, Mario and Sonic the Hedgehog and stuff like that, and they would have completely different lore from the Japanese canon. But then at some point, they stopped making those kinds of adaptations. But now we've got new Mario movies and new Sonic movies. And you would think that nowadays they would try to be more accurate to the source material. But no, because the people making those are the same people who grew up watching those old American cartoons. So they keep digging up this old US lore from way back in the day that haven't been officially mentioned in ages. But now they're bringing back Mario being from Brooklyn and stuff like that. And now you got people saying, see, video game movies can be good if they're accurate to the source material. And the source material in question is like the Mario Brothers Super Show. It's like that one Dobson comic where he complains about Nintendo changing characters' designs and how, oh, this is not their original designs anymore, except what he thinks is the original designs is like what they look like in fucking Captain N or whatever. Just completely ass backwards. Be gone. Leave this place. Alright, so this is the Spectre we couldn't get past before. But now that we have the Sylph Scope, we can unveil that it's actually the mother of the Karakara that was murdered by the Rocket Gang. Now, there actually is a way to skip getting the Sylph Scope entirely. If you use a Pippi doll in this battle, the Spectre will flee. And yeah, the Poké doll is called a Pippi doll in Japanese, or a Clefairy doll. But in English, it's never specified what kind of Pokemon it is. Now, I can see the justification that Clefairy is too long of a name, so it wouldn't have fit in the character limits. Well, then leave the names alone and you won't have this problem. The soul departed to heaven. In the English version, that becomes the less religiously connotated afterlife instead of heaven. But also, the restless soul was calmed. Calmed by what? By me beating the shit out of it? Yeah, that never made much sense, and I guess they eventually realized that. Because in newer retellings of this story, they changed it so that the child Karakara comes up with red and green, up the Pokemon Tower, and that's what calms the mother spirit down. So that version of the story makes a lot more sense, and you may be familiar with that version of the story from Pokemon Let's Go, but don't take this as me praising anything about Let's Go, because that's not where it originated at all. The first time the story was told that way was the Pokemon The Origins anime adaptation, and Let's Go just copied it from there, pretty much beat by beat. And yeah, I was saying about how the Pippi doll is just a generic Poké doll in English. There's even an NPC on Route 8 that I didn't talk about when I was there, who actually says that Pippi is round and fluffy and looks like a plushie. And the English version removes the plushie reference and just says it's round and fluffy. So, it seemed like the translators were really determined to remove the link between Clefairy and the Poké doll. I suppose they originally called it a Pippi doll because Pippi was originally supposed to be the mascot, but by the time the games came out in English, they had already settled on Pikachu as the mascot. So, maybe that's why they changed it? Because Pippi was the mascot Pokemon in the original Pocket Monsters manga. And through the Giga League, we learned that there was supposed to be a Pokemon Pink version alongside Yellow. Right, so this guy mentions the Rocket Gang killing Pokemon, and that part is completely omitted in the English version. Even though earlier on, in the same town, that was an NPC that told me about how the Rocket Gang killed the Gara Gara, and that one didn't get censored. So, what's even the point of censoring if you're not even gonna stay consistent? But yeah, the whole angle that they were going for here with the Pokemon Tower and this entire town, this kind of creepy atmosphere, they don't do this in Pokemon anymore. And it sucks how whenever someone says, oh, Pokemon should be allowed to be darker again, they just get hit with, oh, you just want everything to be Pokemon Snakewood. No, I just want the fucking Pokemon Tower back. Like, people just call you a tryhard edgelord or whatever, just for wanting the series to be what it was originally supposed to be before it got watered down so hard. Pokemon is just cute animals for kids, ooh-woo. Like, don't tell those people about Takeshi Shudo's original novels, where Satoshi's dad abandons him after impregnating his 18-year-old mom who hates her son and also the age of consent is 10. It's only executive meddling and pressure from Western localizers that the franchise is as kidified as it is now. Like, the literal creator of the franchise said, ooh, Gosu is evolving. No, that's not what he said. What he said was, Pokemon Special is the closest the franchise has ever gotten to his original vision. And I know Pokemon Special fans get really pissy when you frame it as like, ooh, dark, edgy Pokemon for adults or whatever. But the thing is, it never would have gotten that reputation if the rest of the franchise hadn't been watered down to such a ridiculous level. Like when someone brings up that panel where the fucking Arbok gets cut in half, and people are like, it doesn't even know that it regenerates immediately afterwards. Like, yes, I know that, but that doesn't change my point at all. Because even that wouldn't be allowed in other Pokemon media. Like, come on, the anime went through phases where they weren't even allowed to show the impact from, like, physical moves like tackle or whatever. So you'd see the Pokemon charging, then it cuts to, like, a full-screen impact star, and then you see the reaction. But the actual impact, not shown. And I'm talking about the Japanese version here, not just 4Kids edits. And I'm expected to accept that Pokemon Special doesn't get away with more than the rest of the franchise does. I'm sorry, but no matter how annoying people get about that Arbok shot, that's just simply not true. Like, even remakes of this game, right? Yeah, this whole subplot is still there. Shion Town, the Pokemon Tower, the ghosts, everything. But the atmosphere isn't. Like, there were all those rumors about kids killing themselves after hearing the music, or buried alive and the white hand and whatever. And of course it's all silly, but people made this stuff up because there's genuinely a creepy atmosphere here. And in something like Let's Go, that just doesn't come across at all. Right, so all these rocket grunts that I'm fighting here on this floor, in yellow as well as Let's Go, those were replaced by the third Musashi and Kojiro fight. Yellow's English script even references the English dub's Team Rocket motto with "Render yourself invisible or prepare to fight." The Japanese version makes no such reference until after the battle with the Yana kanji, which gets translated as, you know, Team Rocket's blasting off again. And there is that glitch again where the music is like missing one channel. Anyway, so that was the last of the rocket grunts here, so we're about to rescue Mr. Fuji, who actually gets to keep his name in the English version. What happened? I thought seeing Japanese names would melt kids' eyes out of their sockets or something. Why is this guy an exception? Hey, here's my theory. I don't think it was the music that made all those kids commit suicide. I think it was Mr. Fuji. And there was another mention of heaven just now that once again got changed into the afterlife. And he's about to take me to his house. Generous of the game to automatically teleport you there. And he's about to give me the Pokemon Flute, which I need to wake up the Kabigons on routes 12 and 16. And it also wakes up any Pokemon in battle, which means that awakenings are effectively useless from this point on, except for the very specific use case of when you have both your own and the opponent's Pokemon asleep and you only want to wake up your own. But when does that ever happen? Let's be honest. Right, and I think this is about as good a time as any to end this episode, so I'm just gonna go outside of his house, and then I will see you next episode.